Okay. Hi, Dr. Bayer. How are you?
Hi there, just fine, thank you.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much.
I think looking over your bio, I think the word du jour is going to be civility. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope so.
Okay. Tell us just a little bit of your background. What exactly you do?
For over 20 years now, I've been CEO, founder and CEO of a company called Civility Experts, Inc. And we now there's about 500 affiliates in 47 countries, and we call ourselves social architects, but we're in the business of building better workplaces. So our focus is civility and civility solutions. Civility relates to everything from respectful workplace to civil communications to dialogue to leadership behavior. It's quite a broad scope of training solutions we offer, but everything ties back to civility, which at the very root is entirely about positive people treatment.
What exactly would you do? Do companies hire you to come in and give talks?
Yes, so I travel and teach about 300 days a year. We do a lot of keynotes and conference presentations, that kind of thing, and so on. But organizations, predominantly workplace, hire us to come in and initially do an organizational assessment, try to determine maybe why they're having retention problems or engagement problems or service complaints or profits are down. Because frequently, many of those things we can tie to people issues. So if people don't trust their employer, if people don't feel respected and valued at work, they don't always perform to their best ability. If people are not feeling safe psychologically and otherwise, they don't learn a lot at work. There's all kinds of indicators of incivility in the workplace. And so we would assess the workplace and then we would make suggestions about which aspects of civility we could incorporate into their processes, policies, and training programs so that we can get increased retention, increased profitability, increased engagement, increased workplace wellness. There's a solid business case for all of those impacts of civility.
Okay. Can you give me a couple of examples of red flags that you might see in companies?
Sure. So, for example, one of the first things we do is engage in a discussion, probably around a board table with a leadership team. And sometimes I will just ask a simple question. I'll say, ladies and gentlemen, will you raise your hand if you believe that the person who makes the photocopies is as valuable or should be treated with the same respect as the CEO who's seated here at the head of the table, as the corporate accountant, as the person on the production floor? Do you believe that everyone in this organization is equally deserving of respect? And if not everybody raises their hand, then we know there's a red flag. And traditionally, 30 to 40% of people raise their hands, and it gives us a good sense of the organization not really understanding that they're part of the problem in terms of overall workplace culture and people's experience in that culture. Because if hierarchy, leadership teams, executive believe that they're deserving of different treatment or better treatment or more fair treatment, clearer conversation, um, more precautions, health and safety wise, etc., than the other people in their organization or team, we know we've got a serious problem there.
Okay. There's something on your bio that I wanted to bring up. Um, Culturally competent is something that's on there. How is that different from cultural sensitivity? Because we hear that one all the time in the news.
Right. Right. So, cultural competence is one of four skills that underpin the ability to be civil. So, many people don't know that civility is a measurable competency, that it's not about manners and being nice. When we talk about respect, there's a whole cluster of behaviors that we teach people to convey respect, but they relate to these skills: social competence, cultural competence, which you've just referenced, systems thinking, and continuous learning. And so, from a civility perspective, when we talk about cultural competence, we're not just talking about heritage or historic culture, where somebody comes from, their upbringing and, genetic background. We're talking about gender. We're talking about educational differences. We're talking about generational differences. We're talking about economic differences, all kinds of issues. But we're also talking about being not just sensitive, but competent in managing all of those aspects within a workplace culture as well. So a workplace that has a union, the cultural components that you have to be sensitive to extend to union. It extends to the way people interact with each other. Doesn't matter what background people are. The union actually often has greater influence in terms of the cultural component. If we're working in a hospital environment, there's cultural aspects there that a person has to be aware of and sensitive to. So cultural competence is more about the elements and aspects when you're living in an organizational culture, and we bring our personal, our family, our heritage cultures to that culture as well. But a lot of times people don't understand that upwards of 60% of the rules or the expectations for how to live in a workplace culture are actually unwritten. So to bring people to a point where they can function effectively and successfully and in a healthy way, we have to make them culturally competent. I hope that makes sense.
Well, yeah, it did. I just wanted to clarify it because you're not referring to necessarily this as sort of a racial background issue about culture. You're
No,
doing
and
it
in fact,
more in
yeah,
for the whole work environment culture,
yes, and I'm
right?
sorry to interrupt. I get all excited about the topic, but the fact is, when we teach cultural competence, we want to do everything we can to avoid the labeling. For example, that's an immigrant employee, or that's a new Canadian, or that's a person of Italian descent. We would work very hard teaching cultural competence to recognize people first. And if we're going to do any categorization, it's based on competency, not rank, but competency and job description and expectations in that regard. We actually try very hard not to reference diversity aspects, because when it comes down to measuring performance, they're not terribly significant at the end of the day.
I'm happy to hear you say that because I've always felt that one's ability had absolutely nothing to do with their heritage. I think in some instances, too much emphasis has been placed on that these
Mm-hmm.
days,
I
uh,
agree.
to the point of affirmative action, which can be unfair. The example that I'm thinking of is Goodyear Tire in Ohio. Do you know this story
No,
recently? Um, Somebody was reprimanded at I don't know if they were fired or what, but because they were wearing a Trump supporting T-shirt before the election, and yet people were allowed or not being reprimanded for wearing Black Lives Matter or other sort
right.
of what was considered social justice type T-shirts. Okay, and it got to the president, and he made a statement in his usual way about Goodyear Tire, and it
Mm,
brought up this whole conversation of should people be allowed to espouse their political views in a work environment wearing T-shirts, and my attitude was that nobody should wear anything like that. As a matter of fact, everybody should wear uniforms because it just
right.
eliminates that kind of individuality that sometimes can be dangerous in a work environment.
Right, and I have a strong opinion about that too, and I agree with you on the one hand that first of all the rules have to apply to everybody, but it's up to the workplace to define what is considered within the letter of the law a requirement of employment in that workplace culture, and if the workplace culture prescribes a uniform without deviation, then nobody should be allowed to wear something. It doesn't matter if it's a band, a Metallica t-shirt, or a Trump
Right,
t-shirt. You can't wear
right.
any of that stuff because you're in breach of the code of conduct or the descriptors for the dress code. So I think employers have to be more deliberate and specific and transparent about their expectations, and then be able to fully um, administer those codes in such a way that everybody is held accountable. You can't pick and choose. And if it's transparent at the onset, then I, as a potential employee, can make a determination whether I can live in that culture or not, right? Provided my human rights and labor code is not broken, right? I mean, we have to abide by some of the legislation.
Oh, absolutely. But this idea of team building isn't helped by everybody just sort of wearing whatever they like. I've seen
No,
this happen in workplaces, and I've also seen it happen in schools. I taught English for 3 years outside of the United States. And one of the first observations that I had, and this was at university level, was that they were all required to wear uniforms. Now, I don't know of many universities in the United States that require uniforms for the students, but it helped. It did help
yeah,
because it promoted this idea of we're all here for one purpose. You know, we're not here to espouse our political views. We're here to learn something. So
right.
by removing that element from the group, it was just one step in the direction of learning.
Hmm.
And a lot of people disagreed with me because they said that, oh, college kids need to be free to express themselves. And yeah, okay, I mean, there is a point to that, but I don't know. I found it easier to teach the kids when they had uniforms and weren't bothered by social dress and people's personal opinions coming out in their wardrobe.
Right. And I think you make an interesting a comment there. You know, we're often trying to teach people that it doesn't take a lot of courage to put on a t-shirt, you know, in a lot of, you know, unless, you know, you're going to your rival town's football game maybe or something, but it really doesn't take a lot of courage to do that. There's you know, we want to teach people the power of communication and conviction and engage in civil dialogue. And if you're going to wear something that is going to cause a ruckus or interrupt kind of the calm of things, then you should be prepared to have a conversation that validates that opinion that you've expressed via however you happen to dress, right? You know, it's all
Exactly.
too
Yeah.
easy, I think. Yeah, like we want to provoke, but then we don't want to provide some rationale or validation or justify and back up our viewpoint at all. So, opinion for the sake of opinion, I don't find it terribly valuable in workplace or other.
You brought up a good point about sports teams.
Mm,
The idea is that, you know, one team wears one color, the other team wears the other color. Imagine if they were free to just wear whatever they wanted out there. It would be chaos, right?
yes,
It would be
yeah,
absolute chaos. So the
yeah.
idea of team building, I think, is a valid point when it comes to what people wear. You know,
Hmm.
I know it sounds old fashioned perhaps, or it sounds even silly, but I think there's a valid point to be made about it.
But I would ask, Douglas, is the uniform something that is helpful to the members of that team, or do we actually wear that uniform to help the officials and to help the observers and to help the other people differentiate, right? It's really meant as a tool to support the onlookers or the third party viewers. The code, the dress and the color, the uniform in and of itself is not an aspect of team building, I would argue, for the actual members of the team. They know each other intimately and they could pick each other out whether they're wearing the same colored shirt or not, right? There's a level of trust and communication, camaraderie, rapport, a relationship there where they don't have to wear matching shirts and they're still going to self-identify as a team, right?
In a sports environment, yes.
Yeah.
I'm referring to it more back to the work environment. Be,
Okay.
be,
Okay.
uh,
So, but
but that
yeah,
would be a different scenario. But I'm saying the whole concept is the same.
True. Yeah,
Okay,
I would
the
agree.
applications could be different, but the concept is the same. Team building. All
Right,
right.
right.
So
Um,
that's my point. That's really my point.
and from a civility point of view, I would say that the actual positive element of team is based in trust, right? And
Agreed. Yeah.
yeah, and I
Yeah.
could put on the same color shirt or uniform as my team members, but we're not really a team until the other aspect is built, right?
Well, yeah. The uniform isn't going to solve all the problems.
Right. Right. Yeah,
That's
yeah,
for sure. But it does help. It does eliminate one potential problem, I
for
guess is
sure.
all I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah.
We do have to kind of wrap this up. Do you have a website that you want to give out? I know
Oh,
you got a
sure.
book. What's the name of your book?
Thank you so much for asking. There's 16 books. If somebody goes to Amazon and Googles Civility or Bayer, Bayer, they'll find them. But the one that I think it would be useful based on our conversation today is called The 30% Solution. You can also go to civilityexperts.com. Thank you so much for asking. But mostly Amazon. You can find all the books there.
Okay. Do you have a personal website or a business website?
Oh,
Is
I
that
do, thank you. Civilityexperts.com or lewbayer.com, LEWBAYER.com.
okay? Super. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was a nice conversation.
Thank you.
Best of luck with everything you're doing.